Hi and good evening. Here are the government responses, our analysis and recommendations on workers' welfare during the pandemic. Pertaining to the workers in the private sector, the Department of Labor and Employment, among the first measures are the implementation of the flexible work arrangement and distribution of financial assistance to different industries. Citing, for instance, DOLE Department Order 209 provides 5,000 assistance to workers greatly affected with the ECQ last March 2020. Department Order 210 gave limited employment to displaced, marginalized workers who lost their livelihood due to ECQ. Another one is Department Order 212, another financial assistance of 10,000 pesos to OFWs who were also displaced. As to tenure, Department Order 215 extends to 1 year the allowable period of placing workers on floating status during the health crisis. And another cash aid under Department of Tourism and the Department of Labor and Employment joint memorandum was distributed in November last year, a 5,000 for employees of tourism businesses. And in April this year, the Employees Compensation Commission also included COVID-19 as compensable work-related disease. For the government workers, the Civil Service Commission permitted alternative work arrangement and support mechanism in May last year. It further declared the absence from work due to the imposition of community quarantine may be treated as excused absence. As for OFWs, the OWA granted 10,000 pesos assistance to some qualified OFWs in February of 2020. A month later, they provided food, airport assistance, temporary shelter, and transportation under the FAST program. In August of the same year, they launched the EASE project, offering educational assistance to qualified children of its members OFW affected by the pandemic. The DOLE Cash Assistance. DOLE said its assistance programs reached 1,059,387 workers and had disbursed about 4.44 billion of its regular budget and a separate of 1.05 billion in emergency fund. Pertaining to multiple work arrangement, because of the alternative work arrangement, government employees found it hard to adjust to the new condition, such that support mechanisms such as health, psychosocial interventions, provisions of personal protective equipment to employees, and reasonable transportation facilities and housing quarters was made available to government workers. With regard to payment for hazard pay for health workers, in a palace briefing, Health Undersecretary Leopoldo Vega said the allocated budget under the Bayanihan 2 wasn't enough to cover the hazard pay and special risk allowance of medical frontliners since January. What we're asking for DBM right now is the hazard pay from January to June of this year. So we're asking for a budget for that kasi hindi na kinaya ng Bayanihan 2, he said. We're hoping that we'll be given that provision from DBM so we can actually easily download the hazard pay and the special risk allowance. The DOLE Department Order number 215-2020 dated October 23, 2020 allowed the extension of the suspension of employment in case of declaration of war, pandemic, or similar national emergencies. DOLE Undersecretary Benjo Benavides explained that when employees or companies suspend operations, they are allowed to place their workers on floating status. These employees are still considered employees but will not be given their salaries for the period that they are not actually doing any work. When allowable period is up, the employee can either be retrenched with separation pay or asked to return to work. Benavides said the department issued the order as the economy is slowly reopening and businesses are resuming operations. Here are our legal analysis pertaining to the political and civil rights of workers. We have discovered that we have sufficient laws that remain applicable and compliant with the present working environment of our workers. They remain effective and protective of our workers. Congress and the executive departments have enacted other laws, policies, as we have cited a while ago, that add protection to the rights of workers, especially during this unique time of the pandemic. On the grassroots level, however, it appears that the laws, policies enacted are insufficient. Like the one-year floating status, it appears is insufficient because of the prevailing condition and the inability of our economy to return back to normal. On the welfare rights of the workers, the welfare rights such as minimum wage, security of tenure, and the likes are still applicable and may still be enforced as against any employer. While there may be some relaxation as to some labor laws like constructive dismissal of our workers, as there is also a need to balance the rights of workers versus the rights of the company to survive. And to keep the balance between the rights of the affected workers versus the rights of the employer, there is a need for the government to do more in terms of giving bigger subsidies and realistic cash assistance which need to be institutionalized. Finally, here are our recommendations. Number 1, the need to protect security of tenure of workers. The government must finance work and wage subsidy schemes to minimize job losses. Provide a 100 billion bailout fund for ailing domestic companies on condition that the beneficiary company shall not lay off workers and not to use the fund to increase the salary of its officials. Number 2, on the promotion of health and welfare. The government must expand the coverage of ECC Board Resolution number 21-04-14 and relax the condition for the compensability of COVID-19 disease. Also, government must grant wage subsidy for returning OFWs and workers in privately owned businesses affected by the current emergency for a period of 3 months. Number 3, on the promotion and protection of political rights. The government must provide adequate and safer mechanisms for mobility for purposes of work. And the government must provide sufficient social and political spaces for political discourse for the promotion and protection of labor. And finally, number 4, on the capacity building and skill retooling. The government must grant startup funds and or income generating asset for displaced workers and provide technical support to ensure sustainability. And finally, the government must launch and support a retooling program for OFWs and other workers affected by the pandemic and provide support mechanisms for its sustainability. That is all for our report. Thank you.